Hey, welcome to Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga,
And I'm Gary.
and we are coming to you from two different countries today. As we had hinted at last time, I am in New Mexico, Gary in Brazil. So we are depending on good connectivity to make it through our conversation today, but trusting that we're going to have some very stimulating conversation.
Hola, tudo bem?
That's right. That's a little Portuguese for you this morning, huh? Well, we wanted to cover a new word to me this morning. Gary's heard it before. We discussed this a little bit before beginning this recording, but it's not a new concept, but a new definition. And so I wanted to share it with you all. And the word is liminality. I always have to pause before I say it because it's strange to my tongue and my brain. Liminality. So the definition reads, liminality is a term used to describe the psychological process of transitioning across boundaries and borders. It comes from the Latin limen, and it's literally the threshold separating one space from another. So you can think about that in physical terms, like a doorway going from a hallway to a bedroom or, living room to dining room. May have a door, it may not, but it's that threshold that you're going through in a physical space. But in the kind of general life circumstances of transitioning from one place and time in your life to another, maybe it's one job to the next, one relationship to the next, one season of parenting to the next, whatever it may be, you have that liminality that you're passing through between what was and what's to come. And so we wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about that concept today, because I think there's some really interesting applications to us as we consider our transitions.
Transitions, and you mentioned kind of physical or time-based transitions, and my head jumped to psychological transitions between moods, between meetings, between thinking of different things at different times, and the transition between work time and family time, and those kinds of transitions also. And is the liminality something that's between? Do they overlap? Do they have a separation space? Do we live in liminality sometimes? How does that work?
I would say, yes, we live in liminality sometimes. And, using the job transition as a place to kind of contemplate for a moment, you may know that your role is coming to an end. Maybe you're a contract employee and you've got a limited term that you've agreed to, and maybe your contract is going to expire in 30 days, and you need to find another role. And so maybe your liminality is that 30 days of in between of finishing up one contract and beginning another. It could be much, much longer. It could be, from the time of learning that you're pregnant to the time that the baby is born. It's 9 months of liminality, right? I mean, I think the time varies depending on what situation or circumstance that you're describing. And so it could be everything from a very short passing through a transition point to a long and maybe even arduous transition period.
And yeah, and sometimes I might feel more comfortable in the liminality space, and sometimes I might feel less comfortable, right? And I'm usually one of those people that doesn't like limbo, doesn't like if we both decided we're going to be somewhere, let's get there, let's act as if. Whereas other people are like, I'm going to stay here for a while, and I'll jump to the new place when every single T is crossed and I is dotted, and we have a perfect plan. Until then, I'm not going. And so there's that. And then, thinking about a tornado, where do you go? You go stand in a doorway, right? So there sometimes liminality can be an uncomfortable place, and sometimes liminality can be a very comfortable place.
Yeah. Thinking about the example of waiting for your first child to be born, you don't know what you don't know. So, relationship is, as man and woman, as a couple without a child. And then a baby is growing and you don't know what lies ahead. Like, there's this eager anticipation, of course, to meet this new little life, but there's also this uncertainty and maybe even a little bit of fear. Like, I don't know what it is to be a parent. I don't know what life is going to look like with 3. I don't know how to navigate this season of liminality in a healthy mental way. And there may be highs and lows as you encounter various, thoughts and process different emotions. And so even though maybe the ultimate expectation is one of joy and eagerness and excitement, the fear of the unknown may contribute to a lot of unrest in that time of liminality as well.
It can, and this is where we can get into kind of rational thought and emotional thought. Not that one is better than the other, but one could go through a thought process like, okay, a lot of people have done this before, like everyone, right? Previous to me, and yet, no one's been me and done it before.
That's
And
right.
am I up to the task, right? And so, and what should I do to be preparing? Is this like a test where I have a limited time, or is it going to come on me really fast, and am I going to cram at the end? And so you're right, you can be in a state of liminality, and it can be useful. It can be a time of joy, or it can be stressful and less useful, and less useful to the people around you also.
Certainly. And as we conclude every conversation, questions really can make all the difference in how you navigate that time and space, right? So if you are asking some curious questions about yourself, about your circumstance, about others around you in this liminality, in this transition space, it hopefully will help you to navigate things with a more positive outlook, a more hopeful point of view, because you see the opportunity for personal growth, even if there's some pain and stretching along the way, that as you kind of succumb to the process of being changed in that waiting period, in that transition space, knowing that, ultimately it's a good thing for you to maybe be out of your comfort zone a little bit and to be challenged and stretched and kind of newly formed in a way for the next season.
Well, and all living things grow through struggle, right? And we sometimes are not comfortable in the struggle. We sometimes don't like the struggle. We wish the struggle would end. But on the other hand, that's how we grow, and that's how we mature, and that's how our thought processes get elevated to the next level. And so this is one of those curious things about how something is uncomfortable and yet it's good for us,
Yeah.
or can be. If we sit back and we say, okay, well, we're using pregnancy. I've never done this before, but let me just say, if you take any transition and you say, okay, what's the best use of my time in this transition, especially if it's finite, how long it's going to be. And someone might say, okay, well, the best thing I can do my highest priority needs to be to keep myself healthy as I do this, and as I'm growing another person inside me. So, that might be, number one. And then you make your hierarchy of what's important to you as your values, and be intentional about that. But if you never ask the question, what's the best and highest use of my time during this liminality period, then I think sometimes it's hard for us to be intentional, and we just drift.
Yeah. I had a number of years where I was a radio host, and I had lots of people that wanted to share their stories with me. And I will tell you that there was one story that has forever remained just stuck in my mind, because it was such a powerful example as we're talking about this waiting space, this liminality, and what do you do in the waiting. So this gentleman had called the radio station and wanted to share his story. And I will preface this that this is a faith-based station, and so there was definitely faith elements of his story. But he said he had been injured on a work site accident, some sort of a chemical spill that temporarily cost him his eyesight. And because of the treatment that was needed, he had to be hospitalized for an extended period of time to go through a treatment protocol for his eyes. And you can imagine the shock to the system about going from being a sighted person to one that's temporarily blinded, all the psychological stuff that does for you, but then just the aggravation and the frustration of not being able to do the things you're accustomed to doing and being kind of chained to a hospital bed. And so he was talking about his mindset in this waiting space, and he was so aggravated. He couldn't watch TV. He couldn't read. There was virtually nothing that he could do. And as he describes the story, he said he was just crying out to God saying, what do you want me to do? And the answer that he heard in his heart and his spirit was, wait on me. And in utter frustration, he kind of yells to the heavens, what can I do but wait? And kind of that still small voice response was, not like that. Wait on me as a waiter would wait on his tables. Don't wait on me in idleness. It was a different kind of wait. It was a service. It wasn't an idleness. And I remember that was so profound to me, because the only other reference that I really had about waiting, I shouldn't say the only reference, a strong reference I had about waiting is the Dr. Seuss book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, that often gets distributed at graduation season. And, the long narrative in there of you're waiting for the bus, you're waiting for the rain to come, waiting for the snow to snow, waiting for your hair to grow, waiting for a yes or no. And Dr. Seuss concludes that the waiting space is a useless space. And so you can have that vantage point. Is this just a useless waste of time as I'm in this liminality, in this transition space? Or is there something profound I need to be doing, experiencing, or learning, as in the case of this gentleman in the hospital bed? How do you change the way you wait?
Wow, that is profound, and I love that story. And I think that's is it useful waiting or not useful waiting is what comes to my mind. And boy, I tell you, it's our choice,
Yeah.
right? And the hard fact is, it's up to us, and it's hard only because some of us don't wait well.
Yeah.
I'm
Me
one
too.
of them, and
Me too.
so but it's a great. I love your illustration and the story about the guy who's in that terrible accident, because it's so illustrative of what we find ourselves in on a micro basis or even a macro basis, and that is, we can see waiting as a waste of time, or we can see any activity as a waste of time, when really sometimes it's exactly what we need.
Mm.
And what are we doing in that time to better ourselves or serve others? And I love the service part of the waiting. Wait like a waiter. Wait like a waiter. Boy, that's something I'm going to write down in my planner to start contemplating the next couple of days, because whenever we think we're in a situation, whenever I go somewhere and I go, I forgot my phone, I'm going to be sitting here and I can't do anything. That's a real thought that I have.
Sure. I
And
think
think about
many of
that.
us.
And well, but there was a time, I'm old enough to have a time when I didn't have a phone to bring with me, right? And so it's funny that I think that now, when that wasn't a thought I would have had before. And so, what is it about that not being able to do stuff in our waiting period is our current affliction, my current affliction?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, and I'll heap another question onto that is, why do we consider that the small things that we do during that waiting period is somehow not as valuable as the planned, executions of our day, when we know we've got a block of time? That small interaction that you may have in that waiting space, that kind of heart and attitude of service, as you've forgotten your phone and maybe you're sitting in a doctor's office and you choose to give your time and attention to somebody else who maybe looks like they're in distress and needs a word of comfort or just a listening ear, that act of service in that moment could be so much more impactful than the grand things that you had planned out for your day.
I'll heap on that. I have heard of many people who have said, I know I've got some big master mission in my life, and like Mother Teresa, and I'm just waiting for that. But it hasn't been made clear to me, so I'm just waiting. I don't know what to do. It's like, okay, so some people may wait their whole lives before they get a mission like that, and quite frankly, you're probably not going to get that mission, right? And so what is it that you're doing? A lot of folks think that without a mission, they can't really accomplish anything. They can't do anything. They can't be productive. Whereas a lot of times the mission comes from the mission of service, the being a waiter while you wait.
Yeah.
being that, being intentional and helping others. Eventually, you find a passion that turns into a mission by that very act, and it's usually in that time of waiting,
Yeah.
in that liminality.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the conclusion of the story for the gentleman that had called into the radio station is he shared that he knew he could speak and he could get on the phone. And so he purposed that he was going to just start praying for people on the phone while he was waiting in that hospital bed. And he went on to say that that was one of the most impactful times of his life to date. And so we are quick to dismiss those little assignments in the space of liminality, in that transition space. And yet it can be revolutionary to you and to other people. And so stopping to ask those questions, stopping to be curious about what is it that I'm supposed to be learning and doing in this transition can be so powerful.
I think that may start or at least involve an intentional choice.
Yes.
Am I going to be frustrated, or recognizing that I'm frustrated, recognizing that I don't like this situation, and right then saying, you know what, that's a flag. If I can choose to be frustrated, if I can choose to be annoyed that I'm sitting here waiting, then I can choose otherwise. I can choose to ask questions. I can choose to think about, how can I be useful in this situation? Does this give me the time to serve somebody else who's waiting with me, or
Yeah.
or what can I do to make this time useful?
Yeah. You were talking earlier about the physical space, the doorway space, the liminality between two rooms, and how in a time of a tornado or something else where there's going to be, a tumultuous weather event, you would go into that space for protection. And I think often we don't see that liminality in the psychological as a space of protection, but it may be beyond anything that we're able to recognize in the moment. Because if we're always having to go and engage in, one task or one event after another, and we don't have that margin, we don't have that transition space, we are so easily burnt out and overwhelmed. And if we were to be able to take a step back and say, okay, I need to hang out in this doorway, as a matter of speaking, right? I need to hang out in this doorway for a little bit before I enter the room, because I need a reset. I need a place of pause and peace, and I need that security over me for this moment before I step through into the next thing. And yet, so many of us are rush ahead people and get on to whatever needs to be gotten onto, that we don't see the protection and the wisdom of kind of hanging out in that transition space.
Yeah, because we see it, as we've talked about just a few minutes ago, as a waste of time.
Yep.
Often we're not being productive in that time. It's one of the reasons I don't choose to reflect enough on my day, or like you said, in between meetings. You and I have both tried to schedule 45 or 50-minute meetings, and so that we have some transition space, time to go through. But we used to have to get in a car and go to a meeting, and that was some transition space.
Mm-hmm.
And now we just go from one Zoom call to the next, and sometimes we're late to the next Zoom call by 5 minutes because we couldn't get off the phone for the last 5 minutes. And so,
Yep.
And it always amazes me how a lot of stuff starts happening in the last 5 minutes of the meeting, whether people realize it's coming to a close, or I have to get this out, or whatever. And it's like, well, couldn't we say, okay, we're going to end the meeting in 5 minutes at 20 till, right? And then, oh, just kidding, right? At the end of it, once we get everybody going, and say, okay, well, now let's write down the action items, et cetera. It's an interesting thing. We don't put those transition places in our lives, or even recognize that we should.
Yeah. Well, as always, just that question, or the purposeful action of starting to question. Maybe you've realized that you're somebody that's always on high alert, high stress. You're feeling the physical impact on your body, and maybe you've even been told by a doctor you need to lower the stress. That's a great place to start asking questions about, what transitions do I have in my day, and am I giving myself margin? Am I extending the doorway, so to speak, between, one room to the next, as I need that time period to pass through? And what can I do to increase the capacity of myself to rest in that liminality, in that transition space, and not be, deeply contemplative about like everything that just happened in the last meeting and what went great, what went wrong, how am I going to translate it to the next meeting that's going to happen, but just to rest and to stop and to be. And I'll speak for myself. I am terrible at being in the moment and being silent within myself to say, okay, I need this place of reset. I need a regrounding. I need to be quiet and just listen. What do I need to kind of recalibrate in myself before I step through the threshold into the next space?
Yeah, because what you just did in the last meeting is going to affect the next meeting otherwise, right? I mean, there's times when I can get, a potential, customer who finally gets it, right? Oh, that's what you guys do. Boy, that's useful to me, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm on a big high and I go into the next meeting, and then the next meeting may be, like stepping through molasses where I can't get something done and my influence seems to be nowhere and I just can't get anything done. And then I'm going to go into the next meeting. What from the previous meeting am I taking into the next meeting on either positive or negative? And can I take positivity into the next meeting?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that we touched on this a little bit a few episodes ago, but that whole concept of remembering and what that does, as you said, both positive or negative, right? You can have traumas from your past that are constantly replaying in your brain that produce a very negative effect as you engage with people moving forward. Or you can have a positive remembrance about victories, small wins, great resolution that happened in the past that can lead you to have some positive interactions in the future. But you have to be really mindful about what you are spending time contemplating on, where your thoughts are being rooted in, and asking the questions about what from that am I taking forward into this? Did I lose you?
Well, and this is the key. And the old financial, no, the old financial um, commercials that used to say, past performance does not guarantee future results. And it's like, well, yes, that's true both ways.
Mm-hmm.
But if we dwell on the past and where we have failed and say, well, we can't change, we can't do anything differently that would make me successful in the future, well, then you're right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a prophet in either way. If you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right. Right.
Yeah.
In other words, that can be a self-fulfilling prophecy either way. So dwelling on things that you've done well and be able and to build your confidence up to say, okay, I have faith in myself to do this in the future is a great thing to do. But also, if you've done something in the past that's, like you said in the last meeting, that could have gone better, what can I do to improve that, improve my odds of doing better in the future? Both of those experiences, whether negative or positive in the past, can lead to a better outcome in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have just a couple minutes left, but I want to just walk through a practical because I think you are a good example of you're going to have to go through the liminality of literally transitioning between countries here in the next couple weeks. You're leaving a time zone, you're leaving a climate, you're leaving a family dynamic, and you are going to have to transition back to your hometown. So what are some of those things that maybe some practical thoughts that you want to engage in as you make that transition that maybe others can apply in other situations?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and thanks for putting me on the spot.
Sorry.
The way to do it, I mean, and it's very important though. This I need to transition well. And by the way, I don't have to do this. I choose to do this.
Right.
But making sure that I have properly, said goodbye to the people that are here and left them in a good space. Right. My father-in-law is out of the hospital now. He's home. We're now entertaining visitors and relatives that are coming to see him, and what can I do to facilitate that and make sure that everybody's comfortable with the fact that Andrea and I are now leaving. And then what can I do on the other side coming home to make sure that people understand, okay, now I'm back, so here's what's going to happen differently. How do I make that transition well in the meantime? What are we going to do in that 36 hours of travel time? How can we be the most productive in that time? How can we support each other doing that? How can we be limited stress no matter what happens? What if there's a flight delay? What if there's this? What if the hotel room isn't ready? What if there's all those things that can happen along the way. And the more we are proactive about thinking about that space of liminality, the better. What can I do? So to your point about what we talked about earlier, I've got now a week left before this happens. What's my maximum and best use of time in that week to properly prepare for the people I'm leaving behind, the transition itself and the travel itself, and the place that I'm coming back to? And how do we make sure that all those things are as good as possible?
Yeah. I think those are some good general questions for us to contemplate, even though we may not be in the similar situation of leaving countries and all those kinds of things, but, from one circumstance of life to the next, leaving a job for a new job, leaving a celebratory moment, going back home to maybe some disharmony. There's all these different types of transitions that we can think about, and asking those key questions. How do I leave the people behind in a good manner? How do I approach the people I'm about to encounter in a good manner? And what do I do in that space in between? I think those are some really powerful questions to ask. So, Gary, how do you say goodbye in Portuguese?
Ciao.
Ciao. Oh, simple enough. All right. Well, we likely will have one more time to record before you get back home. And then I'm going to be leaving the country. So this is going to be a very interesting next few weeks between the two of us all over the globe. But I will say ciao, and I'll see you next week.
Take care.